Okay,
The recording has
off to
started.
Hutch.
Good morning. I'm Hutch Johnson, board member of the Liverdale chapter of ARMA. Today's presentation will last about 45 minutes, thus leaving time for questions at the end. Please submit your questions through chat directly to me, Hutch, and not to the entire group. I will deduplicate questions and have them ready to present to our speakers when the presentation is complete. Today's presentation is entitled MS Teams and Records Management Strategies in a Virtual Environment. Our speakers are Tim Kurucz and Cody Mortimer, both of Innovative Development LLC. Let's see. So that's about it. Please enjoy the presentation. Here are Tim Kurucz and Cody Mortimer. Thank you.
Thanks, Hutch. And let me go ahead and share my screen to get my PowerPoint up here. Hopefully everybody can see that. Hutch, can you confirm?
I can see it.
Okay, great. All right, great. So like Hutch said, we'd like to welcome you to our presentation on behalf of Cody and myself of Microsoft Teams and record management strategies in a virtual environment. We'll go through, just do a quick introduction of each other. Our two pictures are up there, and I promise both of us look exactly like that right now. So we won't turn our video on, but that's us. I'm Tim Kurucz. I'm an e-discovery principal consultant with Innovative Development. Originally graduated with a degree in digital forensics, but moved over into the dark side, as some of my forensic friends might relate to e-discovery. And I've been here for about 6 years, and I've been just enjoying the kind of problems and challenges that e-discovery has thrown my way. Never a dull moment in the e-discovery world, and just excited to be here and talk to you guys about Microsoft Teams. And I'll pass it over to Cody.
Hi, everybody. As you can see, my name's Cody Mortimer. I'm a principal consultant for Innovative Development. I started in 2011 as an e-discovery analyst, performing multiple different kinds of operational supports to clients. Since then, I've worn several different hats, but today, and as always, my focus has always been e-discovery and records management. But now it's more of a strategic approach, creating process improvements and delivering solutions to current clients. But enough about me. Now let's get on to the real information we all came here for. Tim, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So we'll go over a quick agenda. I'll do a brief overview of the current status of Microsoft Team adoptions. We'll throw some numbers at you. Then I'll go into a little bit of a deeper dive into the capabilities of Microsoft Teams for those that aren't so familiar with it. I won't go too far in, but just kind of scraping the surface so we know the data we're dealing with. And then we'll pass it over to Cody for managing and governing the data along with archiving. And like it was mentioned before, we are accepting questions. We're going to try and end and keep this at 45 minutes to allow for some questions at the end. If we don't get to those questions at the end, we'll try and answer those and get your contact information to go ahead and get those answers out to you. So let's move over to what exactly is Microsoft Teams. In basic terms, it's a chat-based collaboration platform. It's going to allow for online meetings and sharing documents and just general collaborating with those in a virtual environment. It's going to be very similar to Slack and WebEx Teams. Those are two of the other applications that are basically in the same running for the top spot here for collaboration. But obviously, we're here to talk about Microsoft Teams, so let's stick with Teams. So over the years, Microsoft Teams has obviously grown. For those that don't know, Microsoft Teams was released in late 2016. Over the 4 years that it's been out, a lot of visions have changed on whether on what it really wanted to accomplish and the different capabilities that they wanted to include and things like that. But over these 4 years, I think they've really cemented a path forward, and it's become obvious the type of capabilities and abilities that Microsoft Teams wants to bring to the table. So just over the last year or so, that's what I have up on the screen here. Let's go through the growth. So in July 2019, it was sitting about 13 million active users, and about 4 months later in November, it went up about 7 million. Took 4 months. Not too much to write home about, but still seeing some growth. And again, another 4 months into March 2020, seeing a little bit more growth to 12 million. And then a boom starts to happen between March. So this is about a week, March 12th and March 19th, 7 days, and we see another 12 million. So something that took 4 months for it to happen between November and March now happened within a week. And when we really sit back to take a look at it, we understand that this is now when virtual environments and the global pandemic really hit to force those virtual environments to start being incorporated into our day-to-day lives. And so starting in March and moving over to April and October, we can obviously see the huge growth of Microsoft Teams as more and more companies and people start to adapt it into their actual lives. So between March and April, we see that there's 31 million active user growth between 44 million and 75 million. And then finally from April to October, this October number was just released by Microsoft at the end of October, it's now up to 115 million active users daily. So obviously Microsoft Teams has seen a lot of growth, especially within 2020. And I think a lot of this has to do with, well, obviously we've been pushed to more of the virtual environments. We can't have in-person meetings in conference rooms at this time. So people are starting to look for a way to collaborate with their teams outside of in-person communications. Another reason is that Teams is just so accessible. I remember when I first received a meeting invite from Microsoft Teams a few years ago, I had no clue what it was, and it just brought me to through my web browser. I was able to join a meeting. I was able to share my video. I was able to talk. I actually shared my screen, and this was all done through my web browser. You can still do it through your web browser, but they also have a desktop app, and they also have a mobile app as well. And so there's just 3 great ways to access Microsoft Teams. And between these 3 ways that you can access it, there's really not a difference between the two. So what I can do on my phone, I can pretty much do on my desktop and my web browser as well, and vice versa. So it's great, very accessible, but then it also just goes to show that the growth is there. So there's a lot of data that's being passed in and out of the system, and we really need to understand what the back end looks like and we're going to go ahead and govern that data. So looking at Microsoft Teams, the way that I like to look at it is it's really built for that consolidation. So you're going to be able to access a lot of already existing technologies that Microsoft offers within Microsoft Teams, which is great because a lot of companies are already using the M365 suite. So you're going to be able to use PowerPoint, Word, Excel within Microsoft Teams. You're going to be able to access OneDrive and SharePoint. That's all going to come together within Microsoft Teams. And one thing to remember about Microsoft Teams is it's not necessarily a completely new piece of software. Yes, it's a new chatting application. However, it's now it's more of a wrapper or a glue that's kind of sits on top of already existing technologies that are out there that Microsoft has already rolled out, and they've already been through the weeds and really been polished, and it kind of just brings them into one location. So as an example, here I am loading my or editing the PowerPoint that I'm presenting today through Microsoft Teams. So you see the little ribbon on the left and across the top to show that I'm actually in the client. Now you can edit Word documents and Excel and anything that you could do with Microsoft apps. You can also do that through Teams. These are the web versions of the applications, so they're great for standard users. But if you're more of a power user like I am at some points, I prefer the desktop app, but it's great for day-to-day work for standard users. And then another example of accessing OneDrive or SharePoint. So here's a document library that I'm accessing, and I can see these files that are within the OneDrive or the SharePoint exactly how I would if I were to browse it through a web browser. So now that we kind of have an overview of Teams, let's go about actually creating a team. Okay. So a team within Microsoft Teams is designed to really bring people together who are going to work very closely together, whether it be in the short term or in the long run. So as an example, I've been a part of many teams. We've had a team, full IT team. You can see this represented by all the computers here. We bring them together, and now they can collaborate on day-to-day work and really get our day-to-day jobs done. And then I've also been part of teams where everybody has a different role. So you might have someone that's part of the IT team, but this project also requires an artist and someone from the QA team, analytics, finance, maybe someone that's just there to give the thumbs up and say, hey, good job. You bring them all together and they are now part of a team, and they're able to collaborate in one location, and at any time they can go ahead and post anything, share anything, and it's all within one place. And that's great because it's going to eliminate a lot of those group or the long distribution list emails and things like that of the reply alls. It's all going to be in one location that you can go ahead and load up teams and just see what you missed throughout the day. So a few things to note: by default, anyone can go ahead and create a team. And that team can be public or private. Exactly what it sounds. Public teams, you don't need an invite or anything to join the team. Anybody can join or leave. Private teams, you're going to need to send out an invite for them to join that team. There is a 10,000 user cap on a team. For most licenses, there are some government license where that's a little bit lower, but for most teams, there is a 10,000 user cap, and a single user can only be a part of a team or a part of 1,000 teams at one time. So if they try and join 1,001 teams, they can't until they join or leave another team, which I don't want to be a part of over 50 teams. I don't know why anyone wants to be a part of over 1,000 teams. So I don't think that's going to hurt anyone too much there. So when we create a team, let's look at the data behind the scenes. When you hit that little create button, a new there's 4 data sources that are created behind the scene. You're not just creating a single entity. They're brought together to operate on the front end as a single entity, but there are 4 data sources that are created behind the scenes. You're going to have a Microsoft 365 group, a SharePoint Online site, and a document library for sharing and collaborating on your files. You're also going to be creating an Exchange Online shared mailbox along with a calendar and a OneNote notebook. And these are the primary data sources of where a lot of this team data is going to be stored when it's done within a team itself. And what I mean by that is that here we have personal chats. Now, yes, this is within Microsoft Teams application. However, it's not a part of a team itself. It's just a private one-on-one chat that Cody and I have together. We're not a part of a team. We're just communicating as if we would communicate on Skype for Business or the legacy link or maybe Jabber if you use that or something like that. This is similar to just a text message that we would talk back and forth on. I'm able to share files with him. We're able to invite anyone else to the chat as well. And then if we move over to Teams, this is the other functionality I like to show, is that this is a screenshot of a team itself. And here I've created an innovative development team, and we have a number of different channels on the left-hand side there. And those channels are going to be used for organizing chats and files and things of that sort. So if we want to make any general announcements or general chats, we're going to put it in the general channel. But if we want to do something more discovery related, or maybe even a manager discussion, something that the new hires don't necessarily need to see, we're going to put that in the manager discussion. Now, I say that because if you note that next to manager discussion, there is a lock, and that means that that channel is actually a private channel. So only a subset people that you invite to see that channel are going to be able to actually communicate and look to see what's in that channel. Now, if someone doesn't have access to that channel, it's not even going to show up on their interface as it does here. And I'll let Cody kind of talk about the back end of that because it does get a little wonky behind the scenes there. But in general, this is where the data is going to sit. So this is a great slide that I like to show. And so your messages, your images, your calendar meetings and contacts, your voicemails, if you have the VoIP enabled in Microsoft to be able to call people within the Teams application, that's all going to be stored in someone's mailbox. Okay. Now, when I say someone, it's going to be stored in a mailbox, because if we're doing a personal or group message, like I showed before, just a conversation between Cody and I, that's going to go to our personal mailboxes. And if we were going to invite Hutch to that conversation, that would also go to his mailbox as well. So whoever's a part of that conversation, it's going to go to their personal mailbox. However, if we move over to chatting within a team, as I showed our innovative team in the general chat in the channel, that's going to go to the team's mailbox. So anything that's done primarily in a team is pretty much going to go to the team data sources that are created when you create a team. So that's going to be the mailbox is going to get all the chat messages and the replies and things like that. Moving over to files, if we share our in our personal chat, again, going back to the conversation I was having with Cody in our screenshot, if I share a file with him, that is going to be saved, or it's going to be sent to him as a link. Microsoft has now started calling these modern attachments. So I'm not actually sending him the file. What's actually happening is when I say, okay, let's attach this and send this to Cody, it's going to send him a link, and that link is going to go to my OneDrive. The file I sent him is then uploaded to a folder on my OneDrive, and OneDrive is actually providing access to that file to anyone who is a part of that chat. So if the chat was with Cody and Hutch, both of those users would go ahead and gain access to that file that was just sent through that message. However, if you share that through Microsoft or a team itself, that goes to the team SharePoint site, and anyone who's a part of that team has access to that SharePoint site. Now, one thing I didn't touch too much was online meetings. You have the ability to have online meetings in Microsoft Teams. They're a lot of fun. They're offering a lot of cool modern technologies and things like that with the blurring of the backgrounds and fun stuff like that. Some great features are in there. And you also have the ability to record those meetings. As this meeting is being recorded using Zoom, you also have it with other ones as well. But what happens with that recording is it automatically gets encoded into Microsoft Stream. So Microsoft Stream was the default location for meeting recordings up until a couple of months ago. Microsoft Stream does not have the capability of data retention and governance or e-discovery. It's a completely different platform that actually security and compliance doesn't have access to. And it was noted about a year ago that they were going to attempt to build those functions into Microsoft Stream itself. What happened at the last Microsoft Ignite, which is their large conference that happened in, I believe it was September, if not early October, they announced that they are going to now allow and move towards allowing meeting recordings moving into OneDrive and SharePoint. Now, this is a big step because moving recordings, allowing them to be saved into OneDrive and SharePoint allows us to leverage those data retention and those governance policies because they already exist in OneDrive and SharePoint, and it allows us to collect those with Security and Compliance Center and the already existing tools, whereas Microsoft Stream was a completely different entity and it was hard. There wasn't an easy way to go ahead and collect that data. So hopefully everyone can digest that. I know it's a lot in different locations, but I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Cody to now talk about managing the data and pass it over to him.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And just so everyone knows, I'm going to be touching upon the same information that Tim kind of just portrayed there, but more in terms of the compliance, e-discovery, and legal hold. So if you might have missed one or two aspects of what he said, you'll probably be able to pick it up further on in the managing and governing the data. But in today's work from anywhere life, it's become extremely challenging for organizations to police how the contents get shared, or how people communicate with each other within the organizations. And now with Teams becoming one of the most popular communication collaboration platforms, implementing the correct level of governance and compliance is extremely critical. And thankfully, Microsoft has been around for a while and they know this. So they've designed several different tools, compliance tools, e-discovery capabilities, and legal holds that can help your organization police the content that we previously mentioned. So let's look at one of the first compliance tools that could be helpful to your organization is information barriers. Tim previously mentioned about the creating of a team that has multiple users from different departments, and in some strict regulated environments, chats, collaborations with different departments may need to be secured by policies, perhaps due to organizational requirements or even external regulatory requirements. So this is where the information barriers for Microsoft Teams can come into play. They can be used to automatically prevent team members from collaborating or chatting with one another based on the information in their user profile. As you can see right there, the flow of information between the financial sector and the investment banker sector has been closed off using this information barrier policies. So there's some common tasks or activities that could trigger a policy violation between multiple users. Some of the most common that you'll see is whenever you try to add a new user to a team, all the users, the policy must be evaluated against all those users. And if it's okay, the users can move forward without further checks. But if it's not, the policy will block the users from being added to the team. In fact, this policy check happens before you even can add the user. So when you're searching for someone like Tim Kurtz, it's going to show up blank. Another opportunity or another example is sharing screenshots between multiple people. If it's okay, the users won't even know that the policy evaluation occurred. But if it's blocked, the screen sharing icon between the person you want to share a screen with or the multiple people, it'll be grayed out and blocked, and you will have no explanation as well. And just one more final example, and you'll see here, it's adding attempting to create a new chat, very similar to when adding a new user to a team. When you're trying to find a user to chat with, and if there's a violation of the policy, the user will not be found, and you can't start to chat. And I wanted just to show a screenshot of this example, just so you can see that in fact there's no reason given as to why the person can't be found. It just says, nope, sorry, can't be found. And there's the license for this is the Microsoft 365 E5 or the Advanced Compliance add-on, and they're created within the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center using PowerShell commandlets. And most of the tools that I'm going to mention will be using the same feature that are using Microsoft 365 Compliance Center and PowerShell commandlets. So if you're wondering about policy changes, it's not uncommon to take place, right? Changes can be made maybe due to an actual information barrier policy change or just a user's job title change. Someone's get promoted. The policy will then reevaluate all the users to ensure that there's no violations. So if a communication existed between two previously permitted users, but now there's been a change in most likely probably a job title, maybe they switched departments, and it's no longer allowed, the communication will be blocked. The chat conversation will become read-only. It won't disappear but deleted. It just becomes read-only because at that time it was happening, it was allowed. And finally, an error will just read administrator has disabled a chat for that user. So again, no real explanation to the end user, but it's a great tool for compliance concerns. And one other point I want to bring up about these information barriers is by default, when applying these policies to a team, they're not automatically set to the associated SharePoint or OneDrive site. In fact, in order to have these barrier policies turned on for SharePoint and OneDrive, a form actually has to be submitted to Microsoft in order to enable that capability within your environment. A second useful compliance tool was the ability to set retention policies. We're all kind of familiar with those. They help you effectively manage the data within your organization. For these retention policies, you can for teams, you can set them across your entire organizations, or choose to set it to a specific user or a specific team. And by default, assuming there's no retention policies or user deletions occurring within teams, the team's data is retained indefinitely. So if you don't have a retention policy applied to it, the data is just going to sit there until eventually someone takes action upon it. If a user does delete or edits the data that's subject to a retention policy, there's still going to be a copy retained while that policy is in effect. In fact, all the versions of that file will be retained as well. And if there is no policy, the latest version of that file will be retained. And retention policies are created using the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center and also using Security and Compliance Center PowerShell commandlets. But Two of the major methods that you can use to configure retention policies is to retain data or delete data. Maybe you have to comply to some organizational policies or industry regulations or other external or business needs. You need to retain the data. Using a retain policy could help you ensure your data is preserved until the retention period expires, regardless of what happens within the app. At expiration, you can set the policy up what you want it to do. Do you want it to just stay there until a manual effort or it's deleted, or meaning take no action, or do you want to set it up to delete? And the second option is the delete policy, which this type uses a retention policy to defensively delete after a certain period. Like if you're no longer required to keep the data, or has maybe no legal or business value, maybe there's a liability to it prior to it becoming rot. But important thing to know, if you set a retention policy up as a delete retention policy, when doing so, the data is permanently deleted from all storage locations from the team service. And another point to remember for the SharePoint and OneDrive, files that team members upload in the team public channels, they're stored in the team SharePoint site. But the files that are shared in the private chats, they're stored at the sender's OneDrive accounts, and the recipients receive access. Like Tim said, those are now known as modern attachments. Therefore, if you want to apply a retention to all the potential files and teams, you'll also need to create retention policies that apply to those OneDrive and SharePoint sites. And that's just for files. For the chats, at this time, when applying retention policy to teams, private channel chats are not within scope. But the good news is we know that now the data is stored in the user's mailbox. So luckily, you can just set a retention policy against the user's mailbox, and that will cover all those private chats as well. And multiple retention policies can occur, and if it happens amongst teams, there's a rule of priority that will play. The first is preservation always wins over deletion. The second is longest preservation period always wins. Third, explicit inclusions always wins over implicit inclusions in terms of locations, and the shortest deletion period wins. Now, some thoughts and considerations about the retention policies to Microsoft Teams is they can't be included in an organization-wide retention policies, meaning if you apply a retention policy to a group of custodians, the teams that they're associated with, it will not be placed on hold. You must create a specific retention policy for that team. And also, advanced retention settings are not available for teams at this moment. So an example of that would be ability to apply retention policies based on a keyword or sensitive information. Therefore, you would need to add the whole team to the retention policy if you have any concerns about the content within the team. Some final compliance features that your organization might find helpful is the communication compliance, which is designed to minimize communication risks in chats by helping detect, capture, monitor, or act upon inappropriate messages. Some of the content could be offensive or profane language, adult, gory images, or sharing of any sensitive information like social security numbers. Workflows can be set up and predetermined in your organization that once one of these messages have been identified, maybe a compliance reviewer could review these flag messages and remove them from the team if necessary. Another beneficial tool would be the policy-based recordings, and Tim previously mentioned about the data being stored in streams, but there's some organizations that have a business need or external requirements to record these teams, but the policy-based recordings are designed to help automatically determine when or not the recording should happen. So even though Tim already mentioned the Microsoft update, it's worth mentioning again, right now, until the beginning of next year, unless a company or an organization opted into immediately transition, the recordings will be in Microsoft Stream, but transitioning out of there in 2021, all the meetings will be saved to the SharePoint and OneDrive, which is good news because that's where the retention capabilities are already built in. And one final tool is the data loss prevention. So its primary purpose is to limit or prevent people from oversharing information. It will monitor, block, report, or encrypt sensitive information, including private messages. So if we're talking about messages and an employee attempts to share some sensitive information with an external guest, and you have the DLP policy defined to prevent this, the message would be automatically deleted. And likewise with the SharePoint and OneDrive files, if the DLP is enabled, someone attempts to share a document containing sensitive information with an outside guest, the document for those people will not open. They won't have any access into that. But before I transition into the e-discovery component of managing and governing data, I do want to bring up about third-party apps. Even though Teams has the ability to add third-party apps and folders from external cloud storage providers, these third-party apps and external storage locations, they do not fall within the scope of compliance tools and the policies I just mentioned. But the main thing to know is when it comes to compliance, every organization is going to have different needs. It's all depending on their external or internal requirements. So there's no definitive standard, but the most important thing you can do is when moving forward with teams is just discuss these compliance related issues, the risks and concerns with all the affected stakeholders. So e-discovery or Microsoft Teams is fully compliant with core e-discovery and requires an E3 license. And the core e-discovery that can be used to search for Teams data across your entire organization, spanning the Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive mailbox where that Teams data does reside. One major takeaway from this e-discovery section is to know the backend storage locations vary, all depending on the content you're attempting to collect. So Tim already kind of mentioned where all this stuff lies during the architecture, but we're gonna hit it again. We're gonna see it again in another chart, just kind of reformatted in a different way, maybe with an e-discovery focus. And remember, the architects between standard channels and private channels will create the most complex situation. So it's important to remember that for standard channel chats and files, that will be found in the Teams mailbox and the Teams SharePoint site. So just think about, as soon as you create the team, you just have the standard channels and the standard chats. So that's all you have at the moment. The data would be found on the Teams mailbox and the Teams SharePoint site. And it gets a little more tricky when you're adding private channels. The files, they would be found within the associated private channel SharePoint site. And for the private channel chats that are exchanging files back and forth, they will be found in the sender's mailbox, with the recipients getting access into those mailboxes, or into the files in their OneDrive. You also may be wondering what type of information is discoverable within Microsoft Teams. At this time, Microsoft is always working. They're always adding capabilities. More data is discoverable. But at this time, right now, it's just the Teams chat messages, private channel messages, the files associated with those standard channels and the private channels, emojis, GIFs, stickers, chat links, and inline images. But there's some items that are also not supported at the moment, like code snippets, reactions. That would be your likes, emoji reactions. And finally, audio recordings. They're not within scope right now until they're fully transitioned into SharePoint and OneDrive, which the eDiscovery core can collect from. As I mentioned, the hardest part is knowing the complex backend storage architecture. But once it's, you have a good solid understanding of it, the first thing you should ask is, what do I need to collect? Well, once you know what you need, you'll be able to decide which component to target for the collection, the standard team chats or the private chats and files. It's important to remember these two components are mutually exclusive. So targeting one component will not target the other. And also, you cannot perform eDiscovery search against a single standard channel. So the entire team must be searched, even though you've been, maybe you're reviewing performance on early the eDiscovery, and it's just in the data you want in one channel, you can't specifically target. You have to collect the entire team. I know, great. That's a lot of information. Just tell me how I can get all the data from a team, and I hear you. If your focus is to get all the data from the team, including the private channel data, you'll need to collect. The first thing is across an entire team. That will be your standard chats and files. The second is the mailboxes of all the private channel members. That will cover the private chats. The SharePoint sites associated with any of the private channels. That will cover any of the private files within those private channels. And finally, the OneDrive of all the private channel members. And that will help you get those modern attachments that we were talking about. And so eDiscovery and legal holds have a lot in common. Knowing the difference between the back-end components and their location is critical for applying legal holds in a successful manner. So when a reasonable expectation of litigation exists, organizations may be required to preserve their team data. Maybe not so much right now because it's fairly new, but we all know it's coming, and that's why we're all here. So if you need to preserve some team data, the first would be determine what is required to be put on hold. Do you just need the team's standard channel chats and those files, or do you need the private channel chats and those files along with them? And Tim's, in my experience, most likely it'll be both. And if so, then in order to place a hold on all the data, you'll need to place a hold on the team. That'll cover the standard chats and files, the private channel SharePoint sites, all the team members private channels for their private chats, and also the private members OneDrives. That will cover all the files shared during the private chats. And a thing to note during legal hold, if a legal hold is enabled and a user deletes or changes any of the files, the hold will maintain a copy of all the previous versions of the content of that data, and it still will be discoverable. Even all versions of the file can be discoverable. But if a hold was not applied, only the latest version of the file is retained. So if you're trying to do some eDiscovery on a file that was changed but no hold was applied, you're only going to see the last version of the file. So which is a good note to remember why you probably most likely will want to put a hold on all the possible data within a team, including those private channels and the members' OneDrives and associated SharePoint sites with the private channels. Another important note, placing a user on hold does not automatically place a team on hold or vice versa. So if I got to place a hold on Tim's data, his email, OneDrive, SharePoint, all that, applying a hold to Tim will not automatically apply it to his teams, or vice versa. Maybe Tim is an owner of a team, I apply a hold to that team. That doesn't mean just because Tim is the owner of that team, a hold is going to be placed across all of his data. And holds are applied using the Security and Compliance Center, which were most of all this compliance tools, eDiscovery, and the legal holds take place. So now that we have a little bit better understanding of some of these compliance tools that Microsoft created for us, the eDiscovery and the legal holds, they can help you manage and govern your team data a lot better, and more modern approach to chats and collaborations than what we're used to. So let's move on now to the final life cycle of the team, closing and archiving. Right there, the title pretty much says it all. There's not too many options. So, you might have several inactive teams, or maybe at the end of a project, you have to deactivate the team. Maybe that's a business requirement, and they leave the owner the option to archive or delete the team. Important notes about archiving is when you archive a team, all the activity stops for that team. So you're preserving a point in time view for the inactive team. It also archives the private channels in that team and the associated site collections. So if a team's been archived and not deleted, it can be unarchived in the future as well. Unarchiving a team is simple and easy as just selecting unarchive in the team's admin center. But deleting, it's a little different story about deleting. When you delete a team, the team activity and the standard and private channels and their associated SharePoint sites are deleted. And it removes the team's mailbox as well as the calendars from Exchange and the associated files within SharePoint. Knowing this, when you delete, there is a way for admins to recover deleted teams, but it can only be recovered or restored within 30 days after deletion. So knowing this, before deleting a team, I would consider archiving the team first for a certain X amount of days. That way you can ensure that any team information or team data is not needed in the future. Because you only have 30 days after deletion to try to get that data back. And now that we've discussed the full life cycle of the teams, from creation to closing, as well as governing the data, let's discuss some tips to deploy and manage the teams in your organization. Tim, what do you have for your first suggestions for our audience?
Sure, I'll take a couple of the first ones here. The first one that I have here is to limit the creation of teams to admins. Now, this is something that it gets overlooked a lot in my experience, and it's something that nobody ever really thinks about. And at first thought, it's like, well, why would I want to do that? The main thing is, and we can go back to what I said before, is 4 data sources are created behind the scenes when you go ahead and create a team. Now, if you think about it, if everyone's allowed to create a team, let's just say, for example, you have 1,000 employees, one person or one team is created per user because everyone says, hey, I want a team. This is pretty cool. Invites their friends and everything like that. And now you have 4,000 data sources behind the scenes for maybe a team that is never going to necessarily house data that's necessary for retaining or anything like that. But now it's something that's out there that you might have to go over and say, hey, look, what is this? Jane's water cooler, what's in here? So limiting the creation of teams to admins and kind of having that request process to go ahead and request a team helps you limit the amount of teams that are going to be in your organization. And it's a lot easier to manage less data than it is more data. And so another thing that allows is for the ability to incorporate maybe a naming standard or something like that. So if for example, you have a couple of different departments and a team's being created for HR, human resources, you can append HR at the end of the name of the team or something like that. So every HR team has HR in the name somewhere, so that when you're looking at a list of teams in your organization, you know that all the HR teams have HR either at the front, the back, or whatever kind of naming standard. Because it's being created by an admin, you have that type of process in place. And finally, a point that I wanted to touch on here is it eliminates maybe duplicative teams being created. So for example, there's a product at your company that a bunch of people are working on, and 3 or 4 different people say, hey, it would be great to have a team on this. Let me invite some people to it. And now you have 3 or 4 teams that might be working on a subject that's under a legal hold, that now you have to manage the data, and it could be duplicative here and there and things like that. So having that creation process could really help limit the amount of teams and the amount of data that's flowing through the team's environment. The next thing is to make all teams private. Now, this is another one that kind of gets overlooked, and it's another one like, hey, why would I want to do that? But the public teams, yeah, it's great. Anyone can join, and it might be great to have, you know, some type of town hall, and maybe you only have one public team or something like that. And but it stops people from just joining teams willy-nilly and just joining and wanting to be a part of everything, because you might now have a user that's subject to legal hold joining a bunch of different teams, and you don't necessarily know what they're sharing in those teams. So making them all private, again, helps that creation process and helps manage that data and understand what each team is really about. And the last one before I pass it off to Cody is to understand the legal and record management requirements. Now, I know a lot of us are in one of these two departments that are here, and maybe you have some pull in some decisions and things like that. But it's really to understand, one, how your user base is going to go ahead and use the Microsoft Teams application. Now, I've heard discussions that Microsoft Teams is the new email. They're going to eliminate emails, and now everyone's going to converse through Microsoft Teams. And then we have other clients that say, you know, I'm going to treat this as a conversation that someone's having in the hallway passing each other. I don't need to know about this conversation. If they're going to say anything important, it's going to go through an email. So one, you're going to want to understand what data is being passed through there and how your users are actually going to use it. And two, you're going to want to understand how you actually want to manage that data and retain it. Some companies might have a retention policy of, we're going to keep this for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, we don't need it. Some are going to want to keep it indefinitely. And one thing to mention, that by default, the data is kept indefinitely. So chat messages are kept indefinitely, unless a retention policy is introduced. So those are just some things from my side that would help in the deploying or maybe even managing the data in an already deployed environment.
Yeah, and another tip is trying to determine how you want to handle external access. So what users, maybe groups, what are they allowed to share? Are they allowed to share data externally? Are there specific locations that should never be ever allowed to be shared externally? And maybe even external chats, are they permitted? Or maybe are they permitted if there's a certain domain name associated with their account name within your organization? So every organization is going to answer these questions differently, but what's the most important thing to do is to engage all the stakeholders to collaborate, come together in agreement and understanding on how your compliance and security concerns are addressed. Another point is to remember the private channels. I know we already kind of touched upon them a few times, but they are important. They do add the complexity to MS Teams, but you know, when creating these private channels, it's a whole new separate data source is created. So even though the private channel is part of the team, the private channel files and their chats will not be found within the team's general SharePoint and their general mailbox. So those files are within their own SharePoint site, totally separate outside of the general information. But on a good note, if the architecture of the private channel seems too complex, you can simply disable the ability to create private channels. Again, another decision that could be made with other stakeholders while planning out the team's deployment. And finally, I finished on this with the legal holds section, but I think it's worth noting again, placing a user on hold does not automatically place a team on hold, and vice versa. So placing a team on hold does not automatically place a user on hold. So those are important distinctions to remember whenever you're setting up your retention policies and your legal hold policies. So that wraps up our tips and deployments for managing Microsoft Teams. I think right now we have a few minutes left to open it up to any questions. Hutch, did we get any questions throughout our presentation?
Yes, we do have some questions here. Let's see, we have from Susan Hadley. Would MS Teams work alongside of a current document management system or replace that document management system?
So this is Cody. I would say that it would more or less work alongside the document management system. The Microsoft Teams is, from my understanding, it's more designed just for collaboration and chats for more maybe informal chats, not so much of a document management system. A lot of the document management systems are maybe more formally designed for e-discovery or organizational purposes, whereas chats or Microsoft Teams, it will become more formal. But right now, I think that the first phase of it is just more of a collaboration, easygoing, kind of you're at the water cooler, you're working on things in a conference room, things like that, but not so much the heavy duty document management systems that you see across some of these larger enterprises.
Okay.
Yeah, but sorry, and I'll just echo
Oh.
what Cody said, and something important that I'll bring up again is that Microsoft Teams is just leveraging the OneDrive and the SharePoint capabilities behind the scenes. So if you're not already using Microsoft Teams, but are using OneDrive and SharePoint, those are basically the technologies that Microsoft Teams is using. So however you're using those currently, it's going to be the same for Microsoft Teams.
And we have another question. For government agencies, SharePoint is still not considered a records repository due to DoD 5015 standards. So having MS Teams store all of this would be concerning for a government agency. What have you seen government agencies do in this situation? Should I repeat that?
I'm gathering my thoughts. 1 second.
Oh.
And Cody, you can let me know. Unfortunately, I don't have that much experience with a government client. Cody might have separate insight to that. And but in these scenarios, I think it might make sense to reach out to your Microsoft rep for concerns on that.
Yeah, and to just kind of go off that, I don't even think there's right now there's capability to really alter where those storage locations goes. It's just automatically into those SharePoint sites. So if those SharePoint sites are a big no-no, then I would be hesitant to roll that out as a source of formal repository.
All right, we have another question, and this is from Jessica Silverman. She just wants a good definition of e-discovery.
Good definition of e-discovery is, okay, so anytime, no, e-discovery, it's the process of identifying, collecting, processing, and reviewing data that could be potentially relevant to any ongoing litigation or investigation. So previously, discovery could be the discovery or review of papers in a file cabinet. Right now, in the modern technology we have, a lot of it's electronic format. So that's where the E is in front of e-discovery, and it just involves searching across the entire organization for any potentially relevant data.
Okay. And we have a question from, let's see, it's Greg Cornwell, and Greg asked, how and where can data be retained? Is it in SharePoint or the DMS? And he heard one of you say that the data is stored in users' mailboxes. So does that mean it can be filed like email?
So yeah, I'll take that, and then I'll let Cody clean up anything that I miss. So it depends on the data that we're talking about here. So messages, anything that we say back and forth is going to go. It's going to be treated like an email, and what happens when I send a message to Cody, it's going to go to both of our mailboxes as if I sent an email. That email is going to be that message in the mailbox is going to be stored in a hidden folder, so the user doesn't actually see that. It's already stored behind the scenes, and it has metadata to be able to tie it to a specific conversation with recipients and so on. Now, when you're sending files, those are OneDrive or SharePoint. Those are going to be you're going to be able to manage them that way.
Okay, we have another question. And this question is from, oh, it's also from Jennifer. She asked a question before. And let's see. What does it mean to place a user on hold?
So placing a user on hold or even a Microsoft Teams, what that does is it's a back-end policy that will prohibit any deletions of the file. So maybe there's a litigation going on and I'm involved in that. My data is on hold. So that means if I try to delete or edit some of the files, the hold policy will prohibit any of that altering of information in the back end. So if the data needs collected for the litigation, all the data that was placed on hold will be gathered. So think of it as a folder in your desktop. Maybe you originally had 5 files, they're on hold in the back end. You delete 3 of them, edit a couple of them, you're left with 2. Being on hold, the e-discovery analyst could go in and collect that data that was previously on hold and be able to retain all that information when you had 5 files previously the day before. So you can think of it as when someone deletes something or edits something, that file goes into a bucket in the back end being preserved indefinitely according to whatever policies you set for e-discovery purposes.
All righty, I think that's all the questions we have. So I can turn it over to Susan.
You mean me, Hutch?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hutch. So I am responsible for next month's agenda, and I'm actually going to be co-hosting with a presenter that I presented with for the ARMA InfoCon this past fall. And we had a virtual session, an on-demand session where we covered defensible deletion, what's working in defensible deletion. And Susan Cisco, who was the primary presenter, is a consultant in the world of implementation of tools for records managers and for information governance. And she conducted a survey across multiple financial institutions to understand where they were in their defensible deletion. And as a result, believe it or not, SEI, my company that I work for, was actually ahead of the game a little bit compared to all the other respondents. So I am the case study for her presentation on what's working in defensible deletion. So that'll be the contents for our session next month on December 18th. Thanks. There you go, Eileen, back to you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for attending today's presentation and look forward to seeing all of you at next month's presentation. Looking forward to hearing your comments on that, Suzanne. I know they're going to ask you questions. I can't wait to hear it. Everybody have a great day and stay safe. Bye, everyone.